Greetings and welcome back to Pseudo's journey through the Japanese Air Tech Tree in War Thunder, a series of subpar guides made for unskilled free-to-play players by an unskilled free-to-play player. On this most intriguing of days, we shall be taking a look at the first of two of a more unique line of fighters in the Japanese Air Tech Tree, the Ki-61-I Ko and the Ki-61-I Otsu. These aircraft can be found folded under the Ki-44-I and the Ki-44-I at battle ratings 3.3 and 3.7 respectively in rank 2 in the second line of the Japanese Air Tech Tree. As a side note, from here on out in the video I shall be referring to these two planes as the Ki-61 Ko and Otsu, or just the Ko and Otsu for short, lest my tongue twists into knots trying to say their full designations. As this is a two-plane special, we shall be using my normal format, starting with the shared characteristics, breaking into a section for each individual model to discuss the differences, and then bringing it back together at the end for the modifications and wrap-up. The Ki-61s are quite a unique family of planes for the Japanese Air Tech Tree, as they are a Japanese take on the German Bf-109 series of aircraft. You will notice a lot of design choices which are very uncommon for the Japanese Air Tech Tree, while any German players will find a lot of deviations from the original Bf-109s. While they might have been based off of the Bf-109s, they are truly their own aircraft, deviating further from the original design with each iteration. To start out with the performance of these early Ki-61s, it will be a bit of a shock for the average Japanese aircraft enjoyer, as much of its performance relies on energy. This is uncommon, as typically we just rate fight everything, as we'll pull inside their turn circle eventually. However, the Ki-61s cannot do that without a bit of forethought and preparation. In a broad sense, the Ki-61s perform best at medium to high speeds, and that performance drops off at lower speeds. However, this is a bit of an oversimplification of a very complex flight model. Looking at the turn rates of the Ki-61s, it is clearly energy dependent. At medium to high speeds, above about 400 km per hour, you pull very tight circles, both horizontally and vertically. Besides certain other aircraft like the Zeros and Spitfires, nothing will really be able to contest you while you are turning at high speeds. At lower speeds, you do run into some issues. Your horizontal rate capabilities tank a decent amount. Obviously you're a Japanese fighter, so you still turn decently, but you are just barely better in a turn than most enemy aircraft at the same speed as you at these lower speeds. If an enemy has an energy advantage on you, they very well might outturn you in a continuous turn. The energy bleed of the Ki-61s during turns comes into play here, as we'll see that you actually bleed quite a bit of energy in a horizontal turn and almost all of your speed in a single vertical turn. This is very important to remember, as you can only get a handful of good turns in the horizontal and one in the vertical. After that, the enemy has a much more fair fight on their hands. Remember this and be very mindful before getting into a fight of how much speed you have and the threats in your environment that might be able to pounce on you once you bleed your speed. Notably, the rudder and roll control of the Ki-61s are fantastic, as with many Japanese planes. You can pull some really weird maneuvers with your plane if you mess around with them. Importantly, it makes it really easy to aim the nose of your plane. This is actually one of the greatest abilities of the Ki-61s, their ability to pull some very good AOA. While going at medium to high speeds, the nose of your plane goes nearly wherever you point it, making keyboard shots very easy to pull off. You can really surprise enemies by turning with them in a larger circle, then suddenly pulling your nose an additional 20 degrees to make a shot they never would have seen coming. However, pulling hard on the elevator does bleed a lot of energy, so be careful and only use it when you're sure you'll get a shot. Overall, the flight performance feels a tiny bit like a Delta Wing, though nowhere near as extreme. You turn very well, but drain energy relatively quickly once you start turning constantly. You have very good AOA and nose control, but using it slows down your plane, bleeding your energy that much more. It is a plane which you can pull very hard turns, but you shouldn't always be doing so. The engines on the Ki-61s are one of the other main benefits, in some ways, compared to most other Japanese fighters at least. The engine has a good bit more power than most other engines in the tech tree. However, it is still a little bit worse than many other nations' engines. Typically, your speed and level flight and acceleration are just a little bit below most US, German, and Russian planes. However, it is a lot closer to them than many other Japanese engines, so if you have a bit of an energy advantage, you might even be able to run away from some of them. The low speed acceleration is definitely better than the high speed acceleration. This is nice for regaining speed after you have done some more protracted maneuvers, but it makes continuous climbs and getting up to high straight line speeds take a good while. A major issue is that, unlike most Japanese engines, the engines on the Ki-61s overheat very quickly when using WEP and can easily burn themselves out if you're not careful. Be mindful of this when you're using WEP, and honestly, I don't recommend using it while you climb at the start of the match. Save it for later when you'll need it in dogfights. Speaking of climbing, the climb rate of the Ki-61s is very average or even a little bit less than average for this BR. You will find yourself level with just about every other fighter at the peak of your climb and a good bit below aircraft like the P-51s and P-38s. This is obviously problematic for a fighter that requires a good bit of speed to perform at its best. I recommend climbing at about 300 km per hour, then leveling out for a while before you encounter enemies just so you can give your engine some time to build up your speed. In terms of your stall climb ability, you are much worse than most Japanese planes. You barely gain any altitude before stalling out and falling back down. Your ability to go vertical and flip over quickly is quite impressive, but it will burn all of your speed. The only times I would use this are when you are trying to stay on someone's tail and you need to quickly burn some speed, and there's no one else around who could capitalize on your slow speed. As for the dive performance of the Ki-61s, it's not bad. You dive quickly and won't have to worry about ripping your wings except in very steep dives, as they won't rip until about 805 km per hour IAS. You should note that steep dives can cause fairly severe control lockup, so if you're trying to dive down an enemy, be a bit patient, don't rush it, or you might find yourself a slight bit closer to the ground than you so desire. Overall, the Ki-61s are a unique set of energy fighters. Your engines are decent, your turn rate is very good at medium to high speeds, and your ability to pull your nose onto target is almost second to none at this tier. But you bleed a fair bit of speed in a turn, really don't have the greatest climb rate, and have a much harder time in a raid fight than you'll likely be used to. Most of your time playing these planes will be spent learning how to perform turns without burning all of your speed, analyzing the opponent's capabilities and energy to see how much speed you actually need to burn to beat them, and keeping situational awareness far more than usual to determine if there's anyone else who will be able to pummel you if you bleed a little bit more energy off. So how should you play the Ki-61s? Well, they really only have a place in air battles, with a very slight exception being made for the Otsu, which we'll discuss later. In air battles, climb up high, level out to gain some speed, and start looking for enemies. If there are a bunch of enemies above you with more speed and altitude, don't be afraid to stick to your teammates. Let them take enemy aggro, and then act more as a support fighter until all the enemies who climbed up have been shot down. After that, start working your way down, diving to the next highest enemy to gain some speed, maintain a raid fight with them without pulling as hard as you can in order to maintain speed, and only pull full AoA and bleed your energy once you have very good position on them and are sure they are out of energy, or that you can get a shot in on them. If they start running away, dive down if they're on low energy and try to surprise them by your decent engine power. If not, let them go and start climbing. If you ever aren't dogfighting, you should be climbing to regain energy. Rinse and repeat until the enemies are gone. The armaments and ordnance of the Ki-61s are one of the key differences between the models, so we'll talk about those later in their respective sections. For their mechanization, the Ki-61s have landing, takeoff, and combat flaps. However, none are particularly useful. The combat flaps are especially annoying as they bleed your energy down, which is something you must be careful with in these planes. Even more annoyingly, they'll rip at less than 300 km per hour, which is just ridiculous. I could never use them for more than a second or two before having to retract them so they wouldn't rip. The only time I would use them is at the top of a stall to pull your nose down a little bit quicker. Takeoffs and landings for the Ki-61s are fairly easy. Takeoffs are quick due to your good low-speed acceleration, and landings can be taken fairly slowly. A fair warning that you do tend to nose over when braking on the runway, so make sure to use the elevator to its maximum and release the brakes every few seconds while slowing down to raise the nose up. The visuals of both Ki-61s are very similar, and they unsurprisingly look a lot like BF-109s. They have long wings and a narrow and short fuselage. Not the worst planes to look at, but not as interesting or wacky as most of the Japanese aircraft. I also must acknowledge the strange paint jobs the Ki-61s get. Personally, I've never been a fan of these, what I call alligator skin looking paint jobs, but they do make the Ki-61s rather unique to look at, to say the least. As for the cockpit of the Ki-61s, it's not great. Remember, I really never play first person, so this is all a subjective view from somebody who has no idea what they're talking about. You sit very low in the cockpit, making any visibility below you difficult. There's a lot of bracing everywhere, the cockpit is cramped, and the console right in front of you is much higher than normal. There's pretty much no rearward visibility to speak of. Overall, the visibility is quite poor compared to most other aircraft in the tech tree. The gun sight is at least very nice, with a good holographic gun sight, absolutely dwarfing the Kika's gun sight in terms of functionality. Alright, that was everything for the shared characteristics of the Ki-61s. They are very similar planes, so there will be very few differences between the Ko and Otsu variants to discuss. The main differences are the guns, ordnance, and armor of the aircraft. Starting with the Ki-61-I Ko. It overall has slightly better performance due to having less armor than the Otsu, but this performance difference is marginally noticeable at best. One of the only annoying things that affects its flight performance is that the minimum fuel load is over 30 minutes, making the plane a good bit heavier. For its weapons, the Ki-61-I Ko sports two 7.7mm Type 89 machine guns and two 12.7mm Hole 103 machine guns. 7.7mm guns are, as we all know, completely useless at this battle rating. They can't hurt anything at reserve tiers, so up at BR 3.3 they are less than useless. They have several belts, with the universal belts probably being the best for damage, not that it'll make them actually do anything. The 12.7mm guns are much more respectable. They aren't nearly as powerful as the Japanese 20mm guns, but their damage is decent. I usually assume that it takes about 10 hits to kill an enemy plane. Occasionally though, you do get a lucky shot and absolutely demolish a plane in a single quick volley. Don't expect it to happen, just be pleasantly surprised when it does. The biggest issue is shared by most other Japanese guns though, the horrible muzzle velocity. These bullets are incredibly slow and drop a lot, meaning that you have to be very close to the enemies to hit them. I usually try to get within 600 meters of the enemies before shooting, as from further than that it becomes quite difficult to lead properly. There are several belts, with the air targets belt being by and far the best, full of high explosive rounds. That's about everything unique for the Ki-61-I Ko. Let's look at the slightly upgraded Ki-61-I Otsu. The Ki-61-I Otsu has several appreciable upgrades over the Ko that warrant its 0.3 battle rating increase. Starting out, it has, now sit down in case you pass out from shock after hearing this, armor. It's definitely nothing crazy and is just a few 16 and 12mm sheets behind the pilot that won't really help you in game, but it's something and it might save you once in your time playing the game from a stray round which might have pilot sniped you otherwise. It does increase the weight a little bit, making you slightly less maneuverable, but this is negligible and is offset by the fact that the Otsu has a lower minimum fuel load of just over 20 minutes, which from what I found makes it almost feel slightly more maneuverable at most points in the match than the Ko. The guns on the Otsu are a direct upgrade over the Ko, having four 12.7mm Hole 103 machine guns. These guns, as discussed earlier, are fairly respectable at this tier, and with 4 of them instead of 2, it will allow you to spend much less time on target to shoot them down, and will also greatly increase the numbers of kills you get while spraying rounds across a turning target. They have the same issue of incredibly low muzzle velocity as described before, so get used to pulling quite far ahead of the enemies before firing if you want to hit any shots. They have the same great air targets belt with lots of high explosive rounds, and they have a fairly high amount of ammo between the 4 guns. Overall, a very decent weapon loadout for this tier. The Otsu does also get some ordnance it can drop, getting 2 50kg Army Type 94 GPHE bombs, 2 100kg Army Type 94 GPHE bombs, and 2 250kg Army Type 92 GPHE bombs. The 50 and 100kg bombs are nearly useless at this battle rating, doing almost nothing to tanks. The 250kg bombs can pop tanks, but only on direct or nearly direct hits. The issue is that you don't have any bomb sights, so these drops will be quite problematic to land. Furthermore, carrying any bombs tanks your energy retention, which is kind of your lifeline in these planes. At battle rating 3.7, Japan still has some decent CAS options, so I would recommend never using the Ki-61s for CAS. The Otsu gets 2 paint jobs, with the default green and silver alligator skin paint job, and a much more sleek silver and red paint job, which just looks better in my opinion. That skin is only locked behind a kills challenge, so no GE required. I think that's about it for the nuance between these 2 variants, so let's look at the finances, modifications, and then wrap up this video on the first Ki-61s. The finances of the Ki-61-I Ko are quite noticeably different for Rank 2 due to being a folded vehicle. It takes 4,600 RP to research, 16,000 SL to purchase, and 4,500 SL to slot, bringing us up to a total of 20,500 SL to buy and slot. The repair cost of a fully upgraded Ki-61-I Ko is 627 SL in arcade battles and 1,324 SL in realistic battles. The finances of the Ki-61-I Otsu are also quite noticeably different for Rank 2 due to being a folded vehicle. It takes 5,600 RP to research, 22,000 SL to purchase, and 6,300 SL to slot, bringing us up to a very high total of 28,300 SL to buy and slot. The repair cost of a fully upgraded Otsu is 816 SL in arcade battles and 1,752 SL in realistic battles. Looking at the modifications for the Ko, start out with the fuselage repair, compressor, and engine, then get the new 12.7mm belts and guns, get the engine injection, cover, and wings repair, get the radiator and airframe, followed by the useless 7.7mm belts and guns. For the Otsu, get the 12.7mm belt, the compressor, and the new 12.7mm guns. Then get the engine injection, cover, and wings repair. Follow that up with the rest of the performance mods. Finally get all the bombs if you so desire. That's a wrap on the Ki-61-I Ko and the Ki-61-I Otsu. These are definitely unique planes for the tree in that they exhibit a completely different playstyle which is normally only seen in other countries. It sacrifices some of the incredible rate performance of typical Japanese planes to give you a bit more versatility and ability to play different playstyles, though at the requirement of a lot more skill than most Japanese fighters. Whether or not you like it is really up to your personal preference. If you do actually like it, worry not, as there are plenty more Ki-61s and aircraft similar to it just a bit higher up in the tech tree. I'd be honored to see you next time, where we'll be looking at the final version of the D4Y family that sports a bit better of a bomb load and a better rear gunner, but overall is a worse plane at a much higher battle rating than the previous D4Ys, the D4Y3 Ko. Whether you're there or not, I thank you for tuning in today.